Hi, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about choosing the right registered office address for your company in China. As part of your market research and business plan, finding the right location is a key component. Understanding where you want to establish your first company is key to your success in China. There are several key components one needs to look at when investigating cities and districts within cities, looking at the legal, tax issues, infrastructure, property levels, hiring capabilities, industrial clusters, your own network of suppliers and customers, and relocation policies, just to name a few of these key components. Again, research for most of this information can be conducted via internet searches, social media outlets, trade shows, local networking or events, or even on-the-ground investigations and due diligence. But working with professional real estate agents is advisable, particularly as they can offer the service of location searches and providing comparative studies, allowing you to analyze each city independently. The real estate agents can also provide you with information needed to help your long-term strategy in terms of rental prices, expansion capabilities, both locally within the city and as well as within China. Now, a question I do want to raise, and it's a question that might be a bit controversial, is Hong Kong a better option than China? Now, what I want you to think about is, firstly, is China even the right location for you now? Is Hong Kong a better alternative? Is Singapore a better alternative? In general, Hong Kong and Singapore are better locations to register a company versus in mainland China. However, it really does depend on your business model, whether having a company registered in Hong Kong, Singapore is to your benefit. The first step would be analyzing your overall business model, your competition, your resources, your suppliers, your customers, your financial status, the legal, tax, and compliance requirements, comparing it against having a company in Hong Kong, Singapore, or having a company in China. Now, the consensus will show that doing business in Hong Kong is far easier and has certain advantages from a legal, tax, compliance perspective. However, Hong Kong is a distinct commercial jurisdiction with different legislation, legal system, and currency from mainland China. Likewise, so is Singapore. So you will not be able to hire local mainland Chinese individuals to work for you legally in the mainland from Hong Kong. You won't be able to issue sales invoices, fapiaos, that are recognized by the mainland tax authorities to your mainland Chinese clients, or alternatively, spend a substantial amount of time in the mainland developing and conducting business, because you would have to travel back and forth. And obviously, with the pandemic right now, there are restrictions on this. So as your business grows, you'll have to consider eventually a presence in the mainland. Hong Kong, Singapore may, however, be a good location to set up an offshore holding company or as an intermediary location until you're more sure about what your plans are for China. Don't forget that Hong Kong, Singapore are also great first steps if you are thinking about APAC, the Asia Pacific region as a whole, and not just China. Now, in terms of offshore holding companies, Hong Kong and Singapore are the most common jurisdictions in Asia used by foreign investors to establish offshore holding companies for investments in the Chinese as well as in the APAC markets. They are the best two jurisdictions from which a solid base can be created to access China as well as then Asia. Now, the purpose of a holding company is to act as a buffer between the ultimate beneficiary and the entity in China, or the entity that you might establish in any other APAC jurisdiction, which could be beneficial for taxation reasons, profit repatriation reasons, etc. But what you need to think about in order to limit the risk is looking more closely at double taxation agreements, looking at the indirect transfer of assets, and looking at the place of effective management of the actual operational entities that you're planning on setting up. And understanding really how this might impact you on the structure that you develop in the APAC region. Now, moving on from Hong Kong, Singapore, and being alternatives to setting up in China or in the APAC region, specifically in China, you do need to think about eventually thinking about trade zones. Would trade zones be beneficial to you? Do they offer you certain incentives that encourage you to establish your businesses in those locations? There are trade zones throughout China. So again, it is a matter of going more in depth and looking at cities, districts within cities, etc. If you're planning on setting up a manufacturing facility, there are usually 5-6 different major metroplexes that are utilized. There is Shanghai, there's Ningbo, there's Hangzhou, there's Beijing, there's Tianjin, there's Guangzhou, and then all the neighboring cities in Guangdong province as well. But don't forget also the Go West campaign, which is encouraging companies to go out west to Chongqing, Chengdu, but also to Gansu province, Guangxi province, Guizhou, Ningxia, Qinghai, etc. All right. Now, before we end today's Daily Insights video, I do want to talk about the legal and tax considerations of choosing a registered office address in China. So if you have decided upon a city, let's say Shanghai, if you have decided upon Huangpu district in Shanghai, I want you to understand what is the legal perspective from choosing this address and what is the tax perspective. So a registered office address is needed for any type of company registration, and virtual offices are not permitted in China. You need an actual space with 4 walls. There might be general spot checks that are done to verify that you are in an actual office space. A 1-year lease agreement must be signed. Any agreement that is shorter than that will be denied during the Chinese company's application process for company setup. So make sure that you're signing a 1-year contract and that is what is being utilized as you are setting up your company. Then you have to think about the designation of the property. You cannot have a registered office address that's in a residential location. It needs to actually be in an office building or to follow the business scope that you have chosen. So if it's a manufacturing entity, it has to be in a manufacturing zone, a manufacturing facility. If it's trade, could be in a commercial space, but could also be if you're having warehousing functions in a warehouse space. If it's retail, you would need a lease agreement that is designated for retail, right? So you have to be very specific about what is the use of the property and that does it match the business scope that you have. Another key component is, like I said earlier, virtual offices are not permitted. And they're in places like Hong Kong, for example, you can actually register hundreds of companies in one registered office address location. In China, that is not possible. Only one company can be registered in one registered office space. So you've got to make sure that that space is available for company registration and that it can be allocated to you. And then from a legal perspective, you have to think about if suddenly you realize that Shanghai is not the right location for your business, and actually you should have set up in Beijing. What do you do in a situation like that? You cannot just pick up your company and say, I'm relocating it to Beijing. Actually, there are a couple of options. One is you can say, I'm going to set up a brand new entity in Beijing, close down and liquidate the Shanghai entity. That's just bureaucratic nonsense. It's a mess. The other option, the more simple option, is you keep the Shanghai entity and you set up a branch office in Beijing. Now, of course, that requires more maintenance costs. You're going to have 2 registered office addresses that you'll have to pay for. But this is why it's so critical to talk to real estate agents and really evaluate through location studies what is the right location for you based on those key components that I mentioned earlier. Now, from a tax perspective, each city is made up of districts. And when you choose an office space, remember that you're registering your company in that city and within that district. And each district has its own local tax bureau, okay? And you're going to register yourself in that district tax bureau and be assigned to that district tax bureau. When we talk about tax incentives that are available in industrial zones or trade zones, we want you to be aware that Yes, there are tax incentives or other forms of government incentives. Be very wary of them. Do tax planning to really understand when those incentives will apply to you, when you can actually use them, and whether it should be a factor or a component to consider that location. Okay, very important to do that type of analysis work. The next is moving offices. So if you set up in Shanghai and you are in Huangpu district and you then say, actually, I can't grow in this district, there's no office space availability, I have to move to Jing'an in order to get the appropriate space. Realize that as you are registered with that tax district in Huangpu, you will have to do a closure audit to then move your tax status to the Jing'an Tax Bureau. And you do have to go through an audit. It could halt your business where you don't have the ability to issue fapiaos because you can't purchase them from the old tax bureau or the new one because you're going through an audit and setting up the new. So there might be a period where your business is kind of halted, and you just have to take that into account and be aware of that. Again, this is critical why you should be analyzing not just which city to be located in, but also in which district to be located in. Now, it is every real estate agent's mantra, location, location, location. And I'm sure you've certainly heard this phrase enough and may wonder why it's said 3 times. Choosing a location for any new business, especially in such a large country as China, is one of the most important decisions entrepreneurs make during the planning phase of launching their China entity. The location of the business can affect many aspects of how it operates, such as total sales, talent acquisition, talent retainment, how costly is it going to be to run that entity and that structure, and then obviously the legal and tax consequences that I mentioned. Do not rush into the decision of choosing your city and choosing the district and choosing the space. The best recommendation any advisor can give you is to meet with real estate agents locally to discuss your lease objectives, your company's goals, together with your financial budget to filter and determine what is the right location for your business. What I want people to understand is the thought analysis that has to go behind choosing your registered office space, and utilize the real estate agents that are on the ground, utilize their resources to help you analyze that. I hope this video today has helped you, and if you've got any questions about the registered address, we're not real estate agents. This is not a service that we offer to analyze what is the best location, but it is something where we guide you on the legal and tax perspective. So if you do have any questions on that, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll provide you with our details or book a call. I'm happy to have a conversation with you to go through it. Have a great day. Take care and goodbye.